Very first. Yeah, very nervous. Yeah. And yours?
I've given a couple of them.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Always the same talk or always different?
This is my second. Yeah, it's a little different, but this talk I've given a little similar one.
Yeah, okay.
So now I'm learning.
Yeah. Okay?
But it's fine.
Yeah.
I think it's just the initial improvements and then.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's good to hear. It's for me, it's also a tryout of sorts. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, and it was nice. So you thought I have to do it more.
But the feedback is always nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, nice. Yeah. I'm very curious. I am not feeling as nervous now, but the past couple of days I was like, oh my god. Yeah. Yeah. So the past couple of days I've been very nervous, but now it's all coming together. So.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Just look at the audience and find that one person just
Yeah. Okay, that's nice.
That's it.
Thanks.
So you give your entire talk back.
Yeah.
Then you move on.
Cool. Not look at the person that looking at their phone. No.
You need feedback, right?
Yeah.
That's when you can move on.
Yeah.
It's very difficult if the audience is done. And that's also sometimes it's easier that you're not looking anywhere.
Yeah.
But it's sometimes very difficult for me because I need feedback.
Yeah.
And if one person is giving me feedback, I'm done.
Yeah.
Just that.
Oh, nice. So after I'm done, I have to give you this microphone. Yeah? Yeah. So before you start, yeah, okay. Thanks. Yeah. So how much time?
All right, so we're starting now. Please take your seats. Just in a minute.
Getting nice now. Ja, toch?
Yeah, you can actually come later, but
Yeah?
All right. We start with the opening. It's going to be short. I just have a few slides. So welcome everybody to November meetup. We don't do React Native meetups as often as we like. We also do React Amsterdam meetups, if you've been on our other events. Mostly because we're liking some content proposals. I'll be encouraging everybody later to propose your talks, would it be lightning talks or full talks, because the more talk proposals we have, the more meetups we can gather, to have some nice networking meetups and just have ability to share our experience with focus on specific technology. So then my name is Robert. You probably saw me quite a bunch of times on other meetups. I work as a tech lead at Zuber, and apart from day job, doing quite a bunch of events, which are like React Amsterdam, React Native, Amsterdam JS. Plus, we recently started one meetup in Berlin, which is also quite an interesting experience and a window to other community. Maybe we'll consider doing something like live streams or sharing speakers across cities, which will be really nice. We're live streaming the event, so we have a YouTube live stream setup. The talks basically are available straight away after the evening. They are available even like right now. You can scroll back and rewatch some moments. This also basically means that everybody who couldn't visit us because of the weather, location, or any other reasons could follow us live, or again, you can share the links, special speakers, which is a really good opportunity to share the recording straight after you finish your talk, like basically on the biggest on the biggest hype level, straight after you finished. We couldn't do those kind of meetups and this kind of amount of meetups with this kind of quality and video recording setup and things like that without partners and supporters. For this event, Evolution Gaming is our partner. They're partnering with us and multiple events actually, also for React Amsterdam and Amsterdam JS, which I'm mentioning for another time. They recently opened an office in Amsterdam, and what they're specialized in are WebGL games for the browsers. Those are mostly online casino games based on web technologies, including React and Redux and all the technologies you like. And they're quite high tech, so if you're interested in web graphics, it could be a really interesting place to consider to join a team, or at least to speak with some of the representatives to get some of their experience. And also, we couldn't do anything without nice venues. So today we're hosted by Lively, really cozy office. I really like the setup. Also, their great camera is helping us to make the video quality even smoother. There will be some intro by Lively representatives a bit later, but in general, hope you enjoy everything. And if you also want to host us, please let me know. We're open to roam a bit across different offices to share to have some different experiences. On the other announcements, since 2016, we started doing annual React conference in Amsterdam. In 2016, it was like super small event. We wanted to start with 100 people, turned out to get 250. Second year, which was 2017 this year, we've been aiming for 500, and we got 1,200 people in the same hall, which is really crazy. The Kromhal Hall, which is our venue, is just like an old chip factory, like a huge event. And we continue doing our annual conference. Next event will be on April 13, 2018. And we'll be in the same place. We aim for gathering the same awesome crowd of attendees. Again, 1,200 people, 2 tracks. One of them is dedicated React Native. So we'll have like 12 talks on the main stage and 12 talks on React Native. Quite a lot of really great speakers already approved our invitation. There will be Ken Wheeler, Brent Watne from Exponent.js, if you heard about him, Gant Laborde, Mike Grabowski. All those speakers will be presenting on React Native stage. So hope you will join that. Yeah, by the way, who was there on last year's? Could you raise your hand? One? Yeah, not that much. Hope this year or next year this will be changed, because it is really a massive event. This is actually the biggest React event. We've been counting and watching our competitors, and it's really great. The community gathering is just awesome. And we've been already launching the super early bird tickets like around a few weeks ago. They were sold out like instantly in 5 minutes. The next batch of tickets, with also the cheapest price you will be able to get, will be opened on November 27th. It's Cyber Monday, straight after the Black Friday. So 9 a.m. sharp, we'll open the tickets. We also expect it to sell really fast. So if you want to get the best deal, we'll also be sharing discounts later on, but if you want to get best deal, that's the best way to get it, with early bird tickets. So as I mentioned, it's really great to have possibility to gather really awesome big crowds in the spaces like Kromhal Hall. It's nice to have like possibility to speak and network with such a lot of people, and don't be really like pressured by small venues. This is a really big place, and we tend to engage with communities through meetups as much as possible. That's what we're doing, also like around 10 meetups a year. Because that's where everything starts. Like, we get speakers from meetups, we get ideas, and we get valuable insights. Therefore, community in general is really important for us. And as I mentioned at the start, we really like to get as much talk proposals as possible. Will it be a talk about native or React, web, or even GraphQL, anything that is closely related to our common tech stack. And if you have something to share, please email us or submit your talk via form. So as I mentioned, it could be anything like a lightning talk from 5 minutes till 30 minutes, or a workshop, whatever content you'd like to share. That would be really great, and everybody will appreciate that. Also, after 2 first talks, we'll have a pitch scene. We're trying it, I think, like 4th time. First time, we had quite a lot of people willing to come up the stage and share their projects. We try to repeat that. but unfortunately we don't get that much responses. So what it is in essence is basically ability to share your projects or share your current challenges you have, or like rise discussion about some problems in the technology community or in a combination of different technologies, and to facilitate just some networking. So if somebody like to come on the stage after the second talk and just speak up about anything technical, again, if you're maintaining open source project, just come here, connect your screen, show it a bit. Hopefully you'll be able to find some contributors, or you at least will get some interesting ideas or feedback. So we highly encourage everybody to come on the stage and communicate with everybody and with the community as much as possible. And yeah, I don't know if you've been on previous meetups, I tend to show the just do it GIF all the time, because we really need you to just do this. Just come on the stage, share at least 5-minute talk. That this is really valuable. That's the best contribution you can give to the local community, and it will give back for sure. So you'll get contacts, insights, and so on. I have more GIFs like this. If you Google it, there's quite a lot of compilations of those. So yeah, I hope this will keep in your mind a bit, and eventually you will propose a talk. So yeah, this is the agenda for today. We have 2 main talks, and then the open pitch session. If somebody already have some idea that he would like to share at the second talk, could you please raise your hand so I also visually know? At least somebody should be here. Well, yeah, I'm not pressuring everybody. If nobody don't want to do that, if nobody doesn't have something to share today, it's fine. But if you'll change your mind, or if you're shy to raise your lonely hand in the crowd, you can just come to me during the talks, propose your idea, and we'll just find a spot for you. And yeah, for different insights, for talk recordings and stuff, you can follow us on Twitter, React Amsterdam, or Facebook, React Amsterdam. Super easy to find. There's not that much, there's not that spammy content happening, but there are interesting articles and real relevant content for React ecosystem lovers and developers. That's it for the intro. I will give now a small word to Peter, and then Leon will continue with his first presentation. Thank you.
All right, so everyone, I'll keep it really short. Just wanted to welcome everyone to the Lively office. People streaming in right now, people listening at home. I just wanted to tell you guys, I'm Peter Beerdeman. I'm the technical lead at Lively. We're a web agency that does concept, UX, development, operations for small businesses, startups, and scale-ups. We do this with a team of 15 people here in our lovely office in Amsterdam. So I just wanted to say, well, thank you for coming here. And if there's anything that we can help you out with, if you got some questions or you want to know more about React Native, feel free to shoot me a question or shoot me an email. And without further ado, our lead mobile developer, Leon Smit, give him a warm welcome.
Hello everyone, I'm Leon Smit. I'm, as Peter announced, the mobile lead here at Lively. And I'm going to talk to you about making sense of the React Native Navigator and our journey through a little bit of React Native. I will try to keep it short because I know everybody came here for the beer and pizza, so let's get on with it. In short, what I will talk about. At first, maybe not everybody knows what the Navigator is, so I will give a short refresher. Then I will talk about why we created one, and I will finish with how you can use it today. So, the Navigator. I think most of you here know what the concept of a Navigator is, but just as a refresher, a Navigator is a scene and view manager. Scene or view manager, just how you decide to call your pages. And the Navigator provides an API that allows you to transition between different scenes. So, for example, here we have a login screen of our internal mobile app. And after the login, you will want to send the user to the dashboard page. So a navigator provides this capability. Well, that was a short introduction to navigators. So why did we create one? Well, when we started with React Native, there was no support for React Router in React Native. There were other solutions, but they were specific for iOS or Android. And in short, they just did not fit our needs. So what do I mean with that? What needs do we require from our navigators? So for that, we need a little bit of history. We have quite the background in hybrid mobile development. We started our hybrid journey with Leef Plezier, which we created in Cordova and Angular. After that, we created the Pardip app, which was also in Cordova, but this time with React. And after that, we switched over to React Native for a couple of apps since then. But why did we switch to React Native? Well, we were already using React. It was already cross-platform, and it was all working super nice. The performance was acceptable because we were using Crosswalk. If maybe not all of you are familiar here with Cordova, Crosswalk enabled us to package a Chromium web view, so every app on Android would run the same. So you wouldn't have weird browser quirks that the web view had on Android. So performance was not really an issue. So why did we switch? Well, what was the problem? Well, no matter how many plugins you install in Cordova, you're still basically creating a web app, and this was noticeable. This was noticeable in a way that you had to do a lot of hacks to simulate the native experience. And also we were creating universal apps. So for example, Leef Plezier we designed in an iOS user interface. And because it's very difficult to separate these two platforms without creating two code bases, we also shipped this UI to Android. So at this point you alienate maybe half of your audience, or half of your user base, because people on Android, users on Android, have different expectations for the UI and interactions with this app. So then what is this native experience that we were trying to achieve? Well, high performance for once. The first thing is high performance, smooth animations, but the most important thing for us is to utilize native UI patterns. And as our designers would say, it has to feel right. It has to feel like a native app. So, what are these patterns? Well, for example, here we have an iOS and Android app. You see the iOS app transitions differently from one scene to the next than the Android app. And this is not uncommon in a lot of native Android and iOS apps. This is what a user expects of these. A user has a certain mental map of how an app should behave on a mobile device. So it's only natural that you adapt this behavior. Sorry, okay. A thing like back navigation. On iOS, you can navigate back using gestures. On Android, you utilize the back button. If an Android user has a similar, or if you implement the iOS way on Android, a user won't immediately understand that he can navigate back using gestures. So you want to utilize the back button. And a thing like tab navigation. On iOS, tabs switch instantly without any animation, but a common UI pattern on Android is that you can use gestures to go from one tab to the next. Okay, those are a few UI patterns that we want to utilize in our app. And yeah, well, with Cordova, we just weren't able to do this. Not as easy as with React Native. So, now the challenge. How can we use a single code base to provide this native experience? Because we still wanted this single code base that we could work on and ship it to two different platforms. So I will now explain to you a bit how we approached this the first time, and then after that I will explain how we improved on that. And okay. So first off, you would start with configuring a bunch of your routes, maybe like this. After that, you would implement the navigator and provide an initial route, provide a render scene method, and the component that you provided with the route would be rendered here in the render scene method. But then you want to implement the back navigation and then you would want to implement native transitions. For iOS, this is the push from right. So you would expect, a user would expect a scene to be animated in from the right, and Android would just have a fade-in animation. And then maybe you will implement a back navigation, and so React Native provides a good API for that, and you have to make sure that on the bottom you have I have a handle back press. Okay. React Native provides a good API for handling the back button. You can just attach an event listener and then handle the back press, but you still have to figure out if you're on the root scene, because if you always return true in the event handler, then your app will never be able to close using the back button. So these are a couple of quirks that you have to figure out. And then there is the navigation bar. The navigation bar is managed from within the navigator, so you have to provide it inside the navigator, and then you have to provide it with left buttons and right buttons. But if you want to render a different left button or right button for a different scene, how are you going to do this in this view? It's quite hard, and you have to do a lot of configuration in, for example, these routes. Maybe you would provide the left button here next to your component, but then you have the issue that you cannot do anything with your navigation bar within your scene. So you would have to create two components, one for the navigation bar, one for the scene, and maybe if you have a search bar in this navigation bar, then how would you provide the search query to the view? So there are a lot of things to consider. And then there is the tab navigator. Well, this is an entirely different story, because unlike the navigator, the navigator is a single API for both platforms, but the tab navigator, for example, you have to implement this the native way. You have to use for iOS the tab bar iOS, and for Android the view pager for Android. And so, what's wrong with this method? Well, first thing, it's very tedious. It's very error prone, because if you do this across a lot of different projects, then you will create a lot of inconsistency in your code base, and then things like bug fixing would be just very much more difficult, much more time consuming. There are lots of different ways to accomplish this, and you get just for transitioning between two scenes, you get all this code. So what can we do about this to make this simpler and faster process? So we did what any lazy programmer would do. We created a package. We created an abstraction layer on top of this navigator. and the tab navigator and the view pager for Android. So our React Native Scene Navigator provides out-of-the-box native platform-specific transitions with native UI patterns, which was very important for us. It's highly customizable, but the important thing is it can only be set up in one way. Namely, the navigator is reduced to this amount of code. The same thing I just showed you, all the very long amount of code can be accomplished with only these lines. Then there's the tab navigator, which has a similar API and utilizes the scene component and renders these icons for the tab bar. If you provide a title, it renders a title. It's just very intuitive, and maybe some of you have noticed, but our API is based on React Router. So we were familiar with this, so people that were creating React apps, web apps for us, internally could transition to React Native and have no problem configuring an app from scratch. And then there's the navigation bar. Well, within your component, you just attach a navigation bar to the navigator, and then you could use a search bar, for example, from within your scene. So, and it's customizable, for example, for iOS. Well, you can do a lot of things to create it to your own needs. Here I changed a couple of colors. I added titles to the bottom bar, and maybe the navigation bar is a little bit different. For Android, the same thing. You can do whatever you like, but the benefit is we can only set it up in one way and just style it to our needs. So there are a lot of developments in the past couple of months, maybe a year. Why do we still use it? Well, for us, it just works. For one thing, it just works. It's battle tested in multiple apps. We know it from the inside and out, and it's fast to set up. This example, all these examples I gave you were from a demo app I created in only 20 minutes. So you can imagine how quickly, how powerful this is for us. So that we can create a navigatable UI in just 20 minutes. So the roadmap for our React Native Scene Navigator. I thought they would come in one at a time, but okay. We want to add more customizable, okay, difficult word, the top one. We want to be able to, for example, be able to change the navigation bar for the tab navigation bar for iOS. That's very, very rigid API at the moment, so I don't know how we are going to do it, but we are working on it. We want to rewrite it to TypeScript, and as you may have noticed, we used the navigator component from React, and that's been deprecated a couple of React versions ago. So we are in the process of writing this out in the 2.0 version. So where can you find this? Well, you can try it out with Yarn. You can find it on GitHub. And I hope you give feedback on our GitHub page and maybe contribute. Thank you for your attention. I am Leon. You can find us, you can find, again, the navigator at GitHub. And a side note, we're also hiring. We need React Native developers. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Leon. Since we have quite loose schedule, we can do a few questions, if you don't mind.
No, it's okay.
So raise your hand if you want to ask questions.
I was wondering if React Native code that you've written is in some way isomorphic, that you can reuse for the website or for...
Well, in theory you could, but then we would have to write out the need for views, and maybe rewrite it to divs or something. But it's an interesting thought, but I don't know for sure. Yeah.
There are some developments on React Native for web, and as far as I know, Twitter Lite, the mobile web version of Twitter, is already running on production using React Native for web. Nicholas Gallagher, the main developer from there, been like having or talks. Yeah, I think he had actually talks from React conferences in the US, so you can look for that. More questions?
You mentioned React Router, and probably
Yeah.
it's kind of an alternative to what you created.
Mm-hmm.
Have you tried to compare it to React Router, and what is more performance? What is
Well, what I understand from React Router, the native version, it's only state management. It's only it doesn't provide transitions like we do. So no, I have not made the comparison yet. But I mentioned it because it's our go-to solution for routing in the browser. So that was the first thing we wanted for our app, but couldn't use. So I don't know if I don't think I can answer your
so
question.
with React Router, the experience would be different.
Yeah, very different. Yes, React Router doesn't provide these native UI patterns. I think I don't know for sure, but I think you have to do a lot of coding like we did in the first demo, in the first example, to accomplish this. So yeah.
Super.
There's a question.
You mentioned that it's also depreciated,
Mhm.
the navigators. How does that work?
I think in React Native 0.43 or something, they deprecated their custom React Native navigator, and that we still use, but they deprecated in a way, they separated it from React Native, and it's its own package right now. So we can still use it, but it isn't very, it's not as efficient with native with native animations as the modern solution, because there is another library. I'm not sure what the name is, but
React navigation, maybe?
yeah, I think so. Yes, yeah. They also recommend that you use that solution right now, but again, we tried it, but it's very rigid still, and you still have to build your navigation bars in the same way as we did, as I explained in the example. And that's something, we just can't do because we want to do more custom things. So, yeah.
More questions? Yeah.
I have a question. I'm
Yeah.
not a React developer or React Native. I'm looking for reasons to pick it up. And if I'm going to do a comparison, let's compare to Xamarin. So what's like the difference? Is there like, would I choose one of the two?
I don't know what Xamarin is, so
Oh.
no. Maybe you can explain.
From what I get, I think it's the same. You write in C#, you write on one code base native
Oh,
apps
okay.
format for
Yeah.
iOS, whatever, and Android.
Yeah, well,
Does
it's
this
mostly
do the same?
for us. We are all JavaScript developers, so for us the benefit lies in our experience with React for Web. So we can apply those skills mostly to React Native. So in that way, it's very beneficial for us. We get high performing apps running on JavaScript, but using native components. So maybe that's
because from what I get, is it true that does this deliver like native performing apps?
Yeah, we can say
You
that.
do it in 20 minutes. You show.
No, only because we created an abstraction layer. The first time we did this, we took a very long time to figure all the Lego pieces to fit them all together, and that resulted in React Native Navigator, C Navigator.
Okay.
And so now we can use this package in our project to set up a skeleton, a basic app very quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just reusing things we learned from previous projects and using them in this one.
For me, it's just pure interest. I want to compare because.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
not
maybe after the second talk we can compare code or something, and we can talk about
I
it.
don't have any code with me.
No, okay, but we can talk about it
Yeah,
over
sure,
a beer,
sure.
okay?
Fine.
It's actually a good example of a pitch. So remember, I've been encouraging to have a pitch. So if you have like a global question like this, like in general, how React Native is better than alternatives like Xamarin or other.
Or what, yeah.
Yeah, so that's an example of a good pitch.
Mhm.
So we had like a freestyle pitch here. So if somebody wants to convince,
Yeah, please.
you're a native developer, right?
Yeah.
Native developer, right?
Well,
Android
basically,
or-
I'm not even. Basically, I'm just a whatever C++, C sharp,
Yeah,
.NET
yeah, okay.
developer, whatever. Not that I want to be blown away.
Yeah.
I think I will be.
So here's at least some holy water for you.
Nice.
All right, thanks, Leon. Yeah, we now proceed with the second talk. Narendra will also be talking about navigation and more details about the content.
Yeah.
Oh, you have the microphone.
We need the last interview.
You're switching microphones, right?
Sorry?
You're switching.
Yeah, we're switching, yeah. You quickly pull this on your shirt. Just go like this.
Should I?
Yeah. Okay, you can just put this in your back pocket or something. That's awesome. Good luck, man.
Thank you. Do I start?
Let's start with the second talk. After the second talk, we'll still have some time for networking here. So please come the second talk.
Yeah. Hello everyone. Thank you for coming in, and also people who's joining through live stream. Welcome. First question I would like to ask before I start off is how many of you have built apps with React Native which is in production? Raise of hands. Good. And out of people who raised your hands, how many of you have done custom animation, custom transition with? Okay, that's 2. Okay, no worries. I think what this talk is basically shared element transition with React Native. I'll try to keep it as basic as possible so that everyone here can relate to what I'm talking. Before I start, I'd like to give you my introduction. I'm Narendra. I work for a company called Booking.com here in Amsterdam as a front-end engineer. So the first question, what is shared element transition, right? So before I answer that, you need to know what is transition. So when I was thinking about what do I actually talk about when I say what is transition, I came up with this definition, which means transition is an animation which guides users to focus on what you want, right? So that's a one smaller definition which I could think of, where you could say that transition which helps users to focus on a particular item. So to give you an example, this is my Instagram profile, which is the profile screen, and when you click on any of the images, it takes you to the photo screen, right? So the way the image is being transitioned into the screen makes you focus on that particular item, and when you hit the back button, it goes back in the reverse. So it gives you the context on what you need to be expecting when you hit the back button, right? So what are the other advantages of having a transition? So context is a very important aspect for any users who is using your app. So no user would like to be lost while using your app. And so when you're clicking on a particular item or when you're performing some actions on an item, if certain things changes immediately, the users get lost. You don't know what has happened. The transition gives you the aspect of predicting the next screen or next element in the screen, how it needs to be animated. Also, while transitioning, there are 2 very important animations which happens. When one is the entry and the exit, which means the second screen enters the viewport, which you could say, and the old screen exits a particular viewport. So you need to handle these 2 particular animations well. In that case, the entire transitions would be done well. So now coming back to this question, what is shared element transition, right? So now you know what is transition. To give you a definition for shared element, as the name suggests, it is the same element which has been used between 2 screens, and it has been moved or changed from one size to another, from one screen to another, right? So it's the whole transition which is happening, but the element which has been shared between these two screens. So now when you get the definition, I'll give you an example which I built, where this is a grid, photo grid app, where you click on a particular photo and it goes to the detail screen. You hit the close button or the back button, it goes back to its actual position. So you can predict whenever you hit the particular image, you can predict what to be expecting in the next screen. So what's the advantage? So it gives you the continuity between the two screens. That means the screen never breaks. You kind of feel that you're still on the same route or the same screen, but actually in reality you have moved from one route to another. Here you could see that once I'm clicking from one image to another, you kind of feel that I'm in the same layer, but you're not. You've actually gone to a different route, right? So it gives you that continuity. And it forces the human eye to focus on what you want, or focus on the context and the representation. So you click on a button and the button grows on to become some image. So you already know what that particular item is in the new screen. You don't really have to teach the user what that item is and how it performs. So now that we have given the introduction about what is shared element transition and everything, I'd like to show some few good examples on a day-to-day app which is there, but you kind of have not, you kind of have ignored this animation. One is the print rest, where you click on a particular, any of the pin, it grows on and it becomes a full detailed screen. That is, the entire pin becomes in a detailed screen. And when you hit the back button, it goes back to its actual position, right? So these are a very small transition, but it gives you a lot of meaning for the user. Another one is a Uber, which you've pretty much been using for a while. You hit on the search and it goes to the search screen, and you kind of feel that it's the same route, but in reality it is a different route altogether, right? Another one is a Snapchat. So you click on any of the stories there, it opens in a big screen, but when you drag it down and when you leave it, it goes back to its actual position. So what's happening here is it's all different routes, but you could see that the way it is transitioning from one screen to another makes you feel that you're still in the same, the app is lighter, and it gives you a good feeling, good experience for the user. So now we have all the basics told. First question, does React Native support shared element transition? How many of you think it does not support shared element transition? Okay, that's a good one, because while I'll be here on the stage talking about how to do it in React Native, right? But in reality, React Native does not support shared element transition. And to explain why, let's say you have an app, and this actually applies for React as well. So let's say you have an app and you have two routes, which means you have a grid route and a detail route. And both of these routes have its own text and image, right? And let's say the text between these two routes has been shared, or the image between these two routes has been shared. There is no way in React you can tell that don't destroy, while moving from grid route to the detail route, don't destroy this text or the image and reuse the same component here, but just change the props, right? So you can't tell anyway. There is a ways to do it, but it gets very complicated. But there's no very straightforward way that this component is used between these two screens. Please do not destroy it, and just change from one size or one position to another and using the same component. So it will destroy it and it will redo it in the new route. So that's the reason why it's React Native does not support, or for a matter of fact, React does not support shared element between the two screens, right? So what's the goal between these talks? Now, the React Native does not support shared element, and I'm going to talk about how to do that with React Native. So the goal is to build this app as we go along. So you guys would be part of this particular session where we will be building this entire app and building the shared element as we go. So the two main aspects, one is using pure JavaScript, which means why? Because why not? Everything these days we can do it with the JavaScript, and also because I don't know Objective-C and Java to write the native code. And also we don't need any compromise on the animation. We need to have a reasonably smooth animation, trying to achieve 60 FPS. So that's the ultimate goal, right? Okay, so now you've seen what we're trying to build, so let's dissect the animation. Let's have it into multiple breaks and see how it performs. So the first screen, which is the grid screen, which fades out, okay? Like I spoke about, is the exit transition. And in the new screen, we have the detail section, which fades in from the bottom. So that's the entry transition. And between these two screens, you have this image, which is this shared, so which animates from one position and from one size to another. So these are the three animations. One is the exit, one is the entry, and one is the shared element, right? So now you saw it. Do you think was the image shared between these two screens? Was the same image being shared between these two screens? What do you think? No? Is that because you think React Native does not support? Yes. Yeah. But anyways, that's the right answer, because React Native does not support, but also I didn't want to complicate it. So the two element which you see here is not shared, and I'll explain you how we are achieving it. So like I spoke about, while dissecting images, you have exit, entry, and the shared element. But what actually is happening here is detail screen has its own image, and then grid screen has its own image. So while animating, you get another transition layer in between, which animates and disappears. So this transition layer would have just the image, and it kind of makes you feel that this particular image has been animated, and it disappears at the last minute, and the last image appears. So we will go through this entire section of implementing that, and you'll probably get what I'm talking about. So things to know. So people who have not used React or done any animation with it. So I'll be mostly talking about few APIs here. So I'm gonna be using this animated API of React Native. So when you use animated API, I need to create a value for that animated API, which here I use animated.value, and for now I've set it to 0. Okay. So this value changes from one value to another, right? So let's consider this as the CSS transition. So you change from one opacity of 0 to 1 at the duration of 3 seconds, or duration of 300 milliseconds. So the value changes from 0 to 1, right? So consider that as like that. And I listen to this value using the interpolate API, where at a given input value of 0, the output value is 1. So consider this as like a graph, or if you have used the keyframe animations in CSS, where at the 0th position, the opacity is 0, at the 100%, the opacity is 1, and the entire graph is automatically done, right? So you get the entire graph. So this is the same thing like that. The input range of 0, you have the output range as 1, and at the 1, which is 100%, the output range is 0. Okay, so you basically just change the value and you just listen to this. Okay, so let's get on to the implementation. So we have two screens, like I mentioned, the grid screen and the detail screen. You click on this image in the grid screen, it takes you to the detail screen, you hit the back button in the detail screen, and you comes back, right? So everyone's just following. So what happens when I do it without transition? Just that implementation. You see, I click on an image, it opens the detail screen, just a random state management. I just change the state, it renders a new component, right? Okay, so like I mentioned, while I'm doing an image click, I have two sets of animation which I can perform. This is the exit of the grid and the entry of the detail screen, right? So let's first get that, and let's talk about shared element later. So let's add the exit transition. So exit transition is added to the entire screen, which is the entire grid screen, right? So which means by default, the opacity of the entire grid screen would be 1, and when I click a button, it needs to change to 0, right? So I'm just gonna listen to the animated value like I mentioned earlier. So when the animated value changes from 0 to 1, set the output range from 1 to 0, right? So the opacity is 1 at the start, and it changes to 0. And this particular thing is triggered with the animated.timing API, which I just mentioned earlier. And this particular animated timing API is executed on the click handler of the image. So when you click the image, you change the animated value to 1, and that is particularly listened to the opacity. These are declarative APIs. So that is listened to the opacity style, and the style has been changed. So if you see how it actually looks, if I just do this part, is the entire grid screen disappears in 3 seconds. So we got what we wanted for the exit, and let's do the entry transition. So in the entry transition, we do it only for the section, which is just the detail section, because the other image, we're going to handle it separately because it's shared element. And by default, the transform is the translate by its position 0. So which means at the given position, I need to translate from the 100th position, which is at below that, and translate to the actual position. Which means you can actually relate this to the keyframe animation, which I mentioned, which means at 0th position, at the 0%, the translate y is 100. At 50%, it's still at 100, and at 100%, it's at 0. So which means at the last 50%, it animates from the bottom. Okay, and this again is triggered by the same animated timing which I've added to the click handler. So how does it look with both entry and exit transition? You click on the image, it's faded, and that particular screen appears in the between. So you can ignore the image which abruptly appears in between. So we've not added any transition to it. We'll handle that later. So we got what we wanted. So now add the transition layer which I spoke about. So to give you a bit of a context of what I spoke earlier, we have grid screen and detail screen. And what we need to do is we need to animate this particular image which is in the grid screen, and we need to animate it to the detail screen from the given position and the size. All right? So what I told was I'm adding a transition layer in between, which would particularly do it, right? So what transition layer, when I click on a particular thing, the transition layer needs to know which image and what size are there, or what position are there. So I will know in the grid screen what size and position were, and in the detail screen, I'll pass them to the transition layer, and in the transition layer, I will animate from the given actual size to the destination image. So this is the whole concept which I'm going to be doing. Okay. So let's animate now. So since we know that we are changing from one position and from one size to another, I'm just going to change the CSS property which is width height for the size, and left top and left for the position, right? So what am I doing? So I'm setting in the transition layer. So now whatever I'm going to do is only doing in the transition layer. So in the transition layer, I'm going to render the image in the source width and height, which is the start width and height, and the start page X and page Y, which is the start position. And I'm going to change that to the different, which is I'm going to listen to that animated value which I told earlier, where at the 0th position, the width would be the source width, and at the 100th position, it will be the destination width. And the same thing I'm going to do for the height, which is the source width and the source height and the destination height, and that continues for the position, which is the left, and also for the right. So what you're going to see here is once I click on that image, this particular entire declarative API has been set, and the entire graph has been set at a given input value. This is the output value, and it executes. So let's see how it looks. Do we get what we wanted? So you can see when I do that, the size of that changes and the image sets up. So this is pretty much what we wanted, right? But I can't really say this exactly works, is because this is not the real app. So for that to be done, I need to do the performance analysis of this to see how performant it is in the real world app. And since this is not real app, I will fake it by making it a simulated to make it a busy app, and by adding it to this code, which means at every 1 second, I'm going to run a for loop, which is forever. And let's see what happens. So this is my app, which I implemented a while ago with the busy app. So as you can see here, there's certain frames which has been skipped, right? And that's just because I made the JavaScript thread busy. And to know why that is happening is, let's see. So when the click happens on the native thread, and the serializes the entire animation nodes, which is the width changes from one position, one size to another, height changes, the size changes, and all of that. And it uses the request animation frame as the animated library. So on every frame, it needs to know when to trigger the new size and a new animation. So it uses request animation frame here, and it gets the new input value. Based on the new input value, it gets the new output value. It sets that, it passes as a props to the views, and the view has been updated using the set native props, and that value has been passed over the bridge to the native thread, and the actual native thread has been updated. So as you can see here, on every frame, this particular section has been executed for every frame, right? And most of the work has been done by the JavaScript thread. So that explains when I made the JavaScript thread busy with a loop, it started skipping that frames because it didn't have enough memory to do it, right? So how do we solve it? So React Native in the month of February kind of launched another API called Use Native Driver, which is very simple to use, which means you just need to add another object here, other value, which means use native driver true. And what it actually does is it moves most of the context to the native thread. So that is click happens, it serializes the node and serializes and passes it to the native thread directly. And here it uses the native driver, which is separate for iOS and Android. And it generates a new input value, it generates a new output value based on that, and the native view is updated. So as you can see here, most of the work has been transformed. But there is a problem with here. The disadvantage with this is It can animate only on the non-layout properties, like transform and opacity, but it can't animate on the layout properties like width, height, top, and left, which is what I have used. So none of the implementation which I've used earlier would work here, right? So we got to change the entire implementation which I used to make it work. So what am I going to do is I'm going to implement the same thing, but using transform and use native driver to get that performance. So if I have to change from one size to another, I'll use scale for it. And if I have to change from one position to another, I'll use translate x and y, right? So that's the alternative way of doing it. So again, coming back to this, I have a grid screen, I have a detail screen, I need to change from one image to another. I'll just go back a bit. Yeah, I need to change from one size to another and from one position to another. But since these two images are not in the same aspect ratio, I need to bring them in the same aspect ratio, right? So because I'm using scale, I can't really depend on the width and height. So the scale happens from the same aspect ratio. I can't change the aspect ratio with the source and destination. And I will here use the aspect ratio of the source and render it in the destination. Also, I need to render the source image first the destination image. Earlier I rendered the source image, right? Now I need to render the destination image, because if I scale from small to big, it will pixelate. Instead, I'll scale the bigger image, make it smaller, and animate it from there, right? So if I scale it from smaller to bigger, it just pixelates. So that's the main reason for that. So to bring it to the same aspect ratio, these are the aspect ratios, easier, width by height. You see the source aspect ratio and the destination aspect ratio. And the difference between that, if it's greater than 0, it's a landscape image, that's the width is bigger. And if it's less than 0, it's a portrait image, which is the height is bigger. So you just need to find new width if it's a landscape image, and if it's a portrait image, you need to find the new height. And that's the only difference. So for the new width, it's source aspect ratio into the actual height, and divide it in for the height. Okay. So this is what my image looks. It's the same aspect ratio, as you could see the source image and the destination image is rendered. But this is not exactly what I wanted. As you can see here, the position is different, right? And it's just because the extra width which I've got, half of it I have to subtract it with the existing position. So then it moves to the center. I just need to bring it to the center, right? So what I'm going to do is, for the landscape image, I'm going to do that new width minus the destination width, which is the difference of the new width, new width which I've got. Half of it I'm subtracting with the actual position, which means it moves to the left. And the same thing I'm going to do with the position y, which means it moves to the top, and it all comes to the center. So when I do that, it actually sits to the center. So this is exactly what I wanted, right? So now, since it's in the same aspect ratio, for me the scaling is much easier. I don't have to worry. So the initial scale is just the source width by the new width which I've got, right? It's as simple as that. So if I implement the scale, this is how it looks. And I've got the image size what I wanted, but now I have to calculate the position, which is the translate x and y. So one thing we all know is scale happens from the center, right? It happens in all the direction, x and y, which means if I have to translate, what I right now know is the position in the translate top left corner. So in that way, I have to translate it from the center of the image, both from the source and the destination. So in that, otherwise it'll really have a weird transition. So for that, I need to find the center of both these images, which means it's just the existing width, and add half of it width add to the positions, I get the exact center. So it's as simple as that. So I have the new translate x and y for the source, which is the existing position. So it's the center of the image. And the same thing I'm going to do for the destination, which is the center of the destination image. Difference between that is what I need to actually transition. So I now have the scale position, which I have, and then I have the new translate x and y value. So now I just need to implement that. So the only difference which I am doing here is the same trigger which I'm using, this animated.timing, but only difference is the use native driver which I'm using here, which is a way to get a performant animation. So so like I mentioned earlier, we did for source. Now we're going to do for the destination. We're going to render the bigger image, and the destination width and height position x and y. But I'm going to replace this entire thing with the transform, right? So I'm going to do that with width, height, left, and top. And then I'm going to say that translate x, the opening translate y, and then it animates to being at 0th position, that's the 0 actual value. And the same thing for the y. and the scale from the actual smaller scale to the 1, which is the default size of it. Okay, so how does this look? So when I click on the image, this is exactly the same transition which I got, but I can't really say it works until I do the performance analysis. So I'm going to do the same code, same for loop I'm going to add, and this is how it looks. So you click on the image, it animates without missing any frame. And the main reason why it didn't miss any frame is because most of the computation is happening on the native thread, and the loop, the set interval and the loop is running on the JavaScript thread. So there is nothing which blocks the animation. So this is what we have got right now. As you can see, there are a couple of things which we need to work. One is the image in the background, which suddenly appears. And as you can see, the source image which has been clicked is not been disappeared. That means it still doesn't feel the shared image. Still doesn't feel it's the same image which has been animating, right? So let's do that. Let's hide the source and destination image during the transition. And what I would do here is, now you could have had a hang of the animated value when I interpolate. At the initial 5% or 0.05%, I'm going to animate where I'm going to change the opacity of that image from 1 to 0. Okay, so the moment you click it, the opacity is 0, which means that you feel that the image, that actual image has been disappeared and this image has been animating. But I'm going to do it differently for this destination image, where at the last part of the animation, I'm going to make the opacity to 0. At the 0th, it's 0. At last 90.99%, it is 0. And the last 0.05%, it actually changes. Okay. So if you could see here, now you can see, click on that image, the source image has disappeared, and the destination image has disappeared. So the transition layer just transitions and disappears, but you can't really feel it because the moment it disappears, the actual image is actually there. The actual image appears there because it appears in the last part, right? So yeah, this is how you fake the shared element transition. But there is last one thing I need to handle before I end this talk, which is handling the back button. So as I mentioned, I had set the entire graph, like at a given input value, this is the output value for the animation, for the opacity, for the translate X, for the translate Y. So what I did was I changed the animated value from the 0 to 1, and when I hit the back button, I just need to change the value from 1 to 0, and the entire animation happens in reverse. So because I have said that this, if the animated value is at this particular position, this is what the output value of this should be. And that's all I have done. And when you, oops, yeah, when you click on that image, it animates to the actual position. And when you hit the back button, you can see the entire animation happens in reverse. And there is no other code to be written to this, just change the animated value, and the entire animation happens in the reverse. Yes. That's it. I've written a small blog post on this a while back. It's on my Medium. And yeah, you can read, it's a detailed one. You can read that, and most of my talk has been covered in that post. And also, the code for this particular app has been put on GitHub. You can fork it, you can build anything on top of it, you can create issues if you find it. Of course, you'll find it, but yeah. And also, I have this entire presentation on SpeakerDeck, which I will also share on the Meetup group post. So you can find it there. And also, how many of you have used Expo? Yes. So now you know what it is. But people who don't know what Expo is, there's an app called Expo on your App Store. You can install it on App Store and Play Store, where you can scan this QR code, and you can use this particular app which I built, which I showed you throughout my talk, and use it on your both Android and iOS phone, and test it out yourself. That's it. This is my Twitter handle. My DM's open. You can ping me if you have any questions, or yeah. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Narinder. Really great talk.
Thank you.
Some compliments from online chat from stream as well.
Oh, nice.
About the slides. So again, we have time for questions. So let's do a round, and then we can continue on the networking side. So just raise your hand if you have questions.
Yes.
You've shown at the start of your presentation some examples from Uber and Snapchat. Are they using shared element, or are they using the creatively strong thing that comes with native React?
The apps which I actually showed you are not built with React Native. Those are just the example of shared element, which on real world some apps have been used. So I've actually spoken to few iOS devs and Android devs, and I see that this is the similar pattern which they follow even while building the native apps for them. So I'm not really sure because they are not built with React Native.
Do you have more questions?
Yes.
You show that you have the starting frame, the ending frame, and then the middle frame where you actually do
Yeah,
the animation.
yeah.
I'm curious why you cannot move the animation to the ending frame.
That's a good question. The thing is, I really wanted to make this talk very simple to relate, but in real world, that's what you would do. So you would actually, instead of having the transition layer, you would pass that information of that image to the destination image, and you make that as the starting position and then animate it. So that's the next step after you implement this, but I felt that this was much easier to communicate while I'm giving a talk, and that's why this transition there. But yeah, that's the actual way to do it.
Because if I understood, you did the animation of the text in the ending frame, right?
Yes, because that's not shared. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
More questions? Does Booking.com uses React Native in production apps?
In production app, no, we don't use it. There are few experiments which we are checking out, but right now, none.
It's all in your hands, right? You can rewrite overnight. It's easy.
Overnight, yeah, I wish.
All right, thanks a lot
Yeah.
again. By the agenda we have the pitch scene. We had some examples here already. If you have some topics to discuss, like just raise a topic, even without going on a stage, there's still a chance to do that. Just raise your hand and speak up. Since we have quite some time for networking to finish the beers and pizza, if nobody wants to do that, you can still walk around and grab some people and make them talk with you. And yeah, thank you very much for being here. It's really been a really cozy meetup. We've had quite some visitors online on YouTube, so also feel free to share the video recording. I already posted it in the meetup.com page, on the event page. And Peter, how many time we'll have till you will kick us out?
Until everyone wants to stay.
Right, so we can stay here for a night, hopefully. Yeah, I think like 9:30, 10. That's fine. Yeah, all right, so thanks everybody for coming, and let's just stay for some networking session and beers.